Couldn't find save for a second there. How's it going? How has your night been? Mine was a very long day, and it's led into a very quiet night. I tried watching that new Zack Snyder uh, cut of the film, the Snyder cut, and I've been pleasantly surprised by the little bit that I've seen. If you haven't seen it, I'll try and hold off on a few things, but the narrative is far better, cleaner. It seems to be a slower pace, which is wonderful considering that, okay, so I need to, first of all, let me focus on this here. I have no idea what I'm drawing again tonight. I'm just going to draw and I'm going to talk, and maybe something interesting will come out of this. With the Snyder cut, I didn't really know what to expect. I kept thinking to myself, like, well, what are they exactly going to do? Like how much actual footage? Because, there was all the bad press and hype and stuff about, what would be in this. Was there going to be anything salvageable? Did it even exist? And, Snyder certainly seemed invested in the fact that there was a version of his film that did exist. It just had been kind of reconfigured by, I want to say Woodrow Wilson. That's not his name. Good God, Josh Whedon. How did I even get the two of that together? It makes no sense. But so yeah, that was I'm excited on one part because there was a part of me that was like, well, what does that mean for, for future, things for the DC universe? Is there going to be more? Is there going to be more stuff coming out for it? What exactly does that mean? And but I thought it was really rather cool that had even made it out, and that, at least according to what some super DC fans that I know are saying, it certainly matches up to the hype. It's something they have been really waiting for, and I guess had enough faith in him that it turned out to be well worth the wait, which is good. I'm glad. I'm not much of a DC fan. I'm not. I've tried to be in the past, and I think for me, I like the kind of weird quirkiness of Marvel, where it's very much, there's questions like, how do superheroes make money? You can go out and do your daring do and things like that, but unless you're government sanctioned, like U.S. agent or something like that, or there's, a benefactor like Tony Stark, certainly, payrolled the Avengers. I don't know if he did that with the West Coast Avengers or anything like that, but there was certainly something like that was, probably helpful. And I imagine, probably gave him some sort of an account and said, hey, here's your allotment, and I don't even know what they would be paid. But they have their own rooms. You see a little bit of Avengers, their compound in the films, and in the comics, it's, made out to be a lot more in some regards, depending on who's doing the writing or that particular issue. But the reason I guess I'd never really gravitated toward DC Comics in general, although don't get me wrong, yes, I like the iconography. I am a fan also of Green Arrow, but more so because of the archery factor and because he was another cool superhero to like, because I liked Hawkeye. So that's always been a big thing for me. I love the Ranger class in D&D. I love archery. I used to practice it when I was younger. I don't do it as much now. I have a bow upstairs that I haven't even brought out to really test or use. I picked it up it's been a few years now. Didn't really do anything with it. But I should. I think part of it is that until I can get a good safe place set up, which means never, for practice and that sort of thing. Because I don't want the dogs out there near me or anything else like that, or to do any harm to anything. And I don't use, I'm so bad at my terminology. The arrows I use are definitely for target practice. They're not meant for hunting. That was never anything I was ever interested in. That never crossed my mind. I think, I've always thought it was more of a sport than anything else like that. But I've loved movies like Brave that show it, and Robin Hood and that sort of thing. And I think growing up in Europe too, that kind of expounded on that for me. Like, oh, hey, this is cool, you know. There's a lot of myths behind it too, just like gunslinging or knife throwing or anything. And those are all things I had interest in as well too, you know. But like out of all of them, archery, there was just something about that, you know. And it doesn't hurt that you have characters like Legolas and Robin Hood and, you know, different ones even in comics that make it really cool. You know, this whole ranged attack, this factor of not really getting in the melee, which is kind of counteractive to how my personality can be sometimes. There's times whenever, you know, I think about that, I'm like, oh, I should think more like an archer. But like even when I used to do security, I was one of the first, and granted I was a lot younger back then, but I would be one of the first ones into the fray if there was an issue. I'd be that first moron to go head first into things and charge in and have something to do with, you know, an altercation. Probably not the best for me. There's always a bigger guy out there. I remember one of the worst fights, and this isn't really going to be about fights or anything else like that, but one of the things I learned real quickly was there was a circumstance where there was a couple of nurses, and we only knew this because they were out celebrating, and they were talking about they were nurses from, I believe, Lee's Summit or something along that line, or they were from somewhere in Kansas City, but they ended up at a bar in Lee's Summit that I worked at, and one of them was this big girl. When I mean big girl, I don't mean width or girth necessarily. She certainly had that to some degree, but height-wise, she probably was about 6'5", and her forearms were much larger than most of the guys that were on the ship, because everyone was remarking about it like, my God, what would we do if she started something? There was a lot of joking about that, but, you know, that sort of thing. But we figured, you know, maybe she was just a lot of show or something. And something happened at the pool tables where two of the nurses got involved in an argument with some other women that were there with a wedding party. And there's emotions already flying high, you know, liquid courage comes into the play, and all this other stuff started to happen. So then when that started to occur, I was like, oh no, we're really going to have some problems here. And I don't remember everything that happened. I was upstairs at the time working the door, but I do remember that over the radio they said, we got a situation down here, it's a big one, and you know, I had to go down there. And when that happens, it usually means all hands on deck, and all the security guards, with some exception, would run downstairs to see what, or upstairs, whatever it was. You know, you either said, you know, basement level or dance floor, main bar, and then you called out these areas. I actually had like this whole schematic worked out, and like that's another whole thing too. People back then were like, "Oh, I didn't think about that." I'm like, "No, there's got to be some strategy to this, man. Like, because everyone just goes running to the wrong place. I don't want to do that. That's how people get hurt." But in this case, I guess something happened, and this whole altercation broke out between these women. And when it did, I guess that one lady, she had something to say about it, because one of the nurses got punched by, I guess, one of the bridesmaids. And it went back and forth, and the fight got really bad. And I guess the nurses got outnumbered, and one of them got injured severely. Well, right about that time, back at the pool table, some patron tried to warn some of the security guards about what was about to happen, but they were too busy trying to get the fight broken up. And she went back to the table where they had been playing billiards. And she had one of those. They were real popular at that point in time, and they might still be. I don't know. I don't carry a purse, but it was like this. It was essentially a sack, and it had like a cinching draw on it, and then you could kind of throw it over your shoulder. Those were really popular at that time. But you know, I thought, oh, it's because it's a big shapeless mass, so it certainly can just carry a lot of stuff in there. And she started filling it with the pool balls. I guess she dropped a whole bunch of them in there, and one of them was like, "Oh my God, dude, look out!" And she went to town. Now, if you're an individual that large, male or female, you're going to do some damage anyway, barefisted. And I guess seeing her friends get their hair pulled and in a real bad fight, and then the husband, this is weird. I guess the bachelor party wasn't there, but some of the women's husbands had come with them to this thing, and they were just there because they wanted to drink and I guess watch the game on television or something. They were egging the fight on, and there wasn't any male accompanying for the for the nurses. And so then the next thing I heard was this bellowing noise coming from downstairs, and this all was happening at the same time. Everyone's converging on that point. I was one of the last ones down there, so I had to make sure I was working the front door, and I had to make sure that that individual was okay, and would be able to handle it. But would also be able to call, Lee Summit Police if we needed even more backup. By the time I got down there, all I saw was this massive figure flailing upon people with this cinched up bag full of billiard balls. And you ever heard like a pool ball hit the floor and bounce? That's the same noise it was making as it was connecting with skulls. And it was at the exact same time the most amazing spectacle I'd ever seen, the most horrifying. Because when you're security, you don't, and this, I learned this rather quickly, you don't really deal with the idea that you may have to intercede with a fight with women. And especially not one that's bigger than you. And I learned that lesson real harsh and real quickly at that bar. And there was many other circumstances where I learned even more lessons about that. But because of that, I didn't know what to do, and nobody else knew what to do. We didn't carry mace. We didn't have anything. We were unarmed guards. And we ended up having to call Lee Summit Police Department. We managed to get the parties outside, pushed them out the door. And when we did, it just erupted in the back area. It was right next to this white picket fence that went into at that point in time, it was a golf course. I don't think it's that anymore. And it fell over into there, and it was just pitched back and forth. It was crazy. And the entire time, I'm like, oh my God. And I'm yelling at most of my guys. And the other guy that I co-managed the security team with was like, stop fucking going over there. Stop. Just let them. Jesus, the police are here. And that woman's going to town. I mean, you can just hear crack. It was like, I don't know, not Jalele balls. Those clacker balls. Maybe that's what it was. It used to be these balls on like string that would smack together. Old school toy. Whoo, she was laying people out, man. Like there was no coming back from the way that woman was hitting people. And we were really scared that she was gonna, quite frankly, really hurt or kill somebody, blow to the head like that. And the bride is screaming. Her bridesmiths, everyone with a party was screaming, and the nurses then were like trying to get her to calm down. But I don't know if we managed to unlock some character development in that movement right there, where all of a sudden, and I'm speaking legit on this, after having worked so many times and seen some really horrible things happen. There's a point wherever something goes and unlocks in a person, and that rage you're seeing coming out, it isn't over what happened. It's not. It's like, it's like there's this little vessel, right? It's sitting there floating, and in here, deep in that little hole, is this horrible little secret. And if you take, oh, you know what? Whoa, look at that. I have more pen nibs. I didn't know that. Man, I'm just discovering things and all kinds of stuff. Oh, that's really cool. You know what? I got to show this to the dude that sold it to me. I bet he didn't know there were pen nibs in this thing. Anyway, so it's really deep inside and recessed in there. And that anger could be like from third grade when somebody like cut off a ponytail, of hers or something, or poked her or called her fat or ugly or angry or whatever. It went back to there. And from a therapy standpoint, from a psychological standpoint, from what I know, I am no psychologist, I'm no counselor. I've asked many of them, and they've said that a lot of times people will often, they end up being subjugated to these past hatreds because maybe they've never been able to get mad or anything. And then when you throw something like alcohol into the mix, all of a sudden, all bets are off. You just don't know what's going to happen at that point. You just don't. I mean, everything in the world could go wrong, or right, depending on what the intent is. And the sad part about it was she had managed to clean the houses of most of the people that were involved from the wedding party, and it was getting really bad. And then she wanted to fight some of the security people. And one thing led to another. Pardon me. And so then when that all happened, Lisa and police department got there, and they were like trying to get her to calm down. And there was one lady, I don't know if she was a sergeant or what. She's clearly the one in charge. She's yelling at her, just like, stop. I'm telling you to stop. Calm the F down. And she's screaming at her. And the woman's like, you don't understand. Just like, you know, that drunk, like, just, you don't understand what I've been going through. Why would they ruin my night? And just all these things. And started making threatening advances to the police, which is, you know, not great. That's not the best thing to do. And she raised that sack of balls and started swinging. And we heard pop, 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 pop. And 4 tasers went off. Wires flew. Sink, 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 sink. And like a great behemoth with a loaded sack of balls, she fell hard. I don't think it would be, I don't think it'd be an exaggeration to say that she left an impression. Like, not because of her size, like just the dead weight of suddenly your spinal cord going, I'm no longer here. I'm in the Bermudas, you know, like just lost as hell. She just went down. It was and wham. And it took the fight out of her, but not the anger. And I don't know why I started with this story. I think it was just something I've been like going reflectively, you know, through my mind on old stories and things like that. So maybe that's some of it. I don't know. I don't remember what it was about. I've been watching some podcasts and listening to different podcasts and stuff. So I've been like in the storytelling mode. But you know, it's funny. Like, unless it's certain circumstances, I never really get a chance to talk about my days when I did security guard stuff. And I've talked to other security guards who, when we finally get together, we're like, oh yeah, oh, I did, you know, you get so excited because there's finally somebody that understands. It's like old vets from Vietnam or Korea or stuff. And I mean, that stuff's way more intense than anything I've ever been through, but it's the same sort of thing. And there's a quality in there that actually exists where, you know, that's certainly a type of person, you know, when you've done private sector security. I mean, I have stories from the Nelson I could tell, getting naked people off of the artwork, just dumb things like that. And it's a world that, you know, a lot of people work in, but everyone's got interesting stories about that sort of thing. So the point of it, I guess, was the story factor. And it made me kind of go back and start thinking about some of the stuff that I really liked, you know, from when I worked at some of these places and what that was like. And I always thought about that. I was like, man, that's kind of a trip to think about. In case you're wondering, I'm drawing some kind of city, like outer space scape. I don't really know what I'm doing yet. I really don't. Sorry. I don't know why I'm apologizing. I said this was going to be for fun, so that's where it's going to stay at. Let me erase this. I'm not liking that. So in case you're wondering, I went into another layer. So I added layer 2 here, and that's underneath the drawing here. I don't know how many people that will ever watch these know what I'm doing in these programs. I imagine that some people, especially if they're friends of mine and stuff, eventually will be like, oh, hey, that's cool. That's how he does that sort of thing. But this is something, I was trying to come up with some visuals of like there's a concept in the world of Ardor. This isn't really giving away too much in the storyline, but there is a range of mountains that exists on Ardor that were basically ripped up out of the ground on, it's a gigantic slash, like a gash in the side of the planet, and embedded in the center of Ardor is a moon. And there was a cataclysmic explosion some time ago that led to this happening. And that's part of what the story goes into. I'm not going to give everything away, mostly because I don't have most of it written. That was slick. But yeah, so I've been trying in my head to like go, okay, well, what do some of these things look like? You know, what would these cities and places look like that, you know, that float around or that are part of art, or what are they exactly? You know, Like, what do they look like? You know, do they have, you know, what's the character behind them? And I've always been fascinated. Like, I remember when I was young, I don't remember what caverns I went to that I thought were just the coolest things on the planet. And it wasn't Carlsbad, it was something else. And I remember going to them and thinking, this is wild. I've never seen anything like this. And I think for the most part, what really gravitated, you know, for me, for like just the amazingness of it, was just the whole, how it felt like an alien world. And you know, growing up with a mom who was a Trekkie, she still is, and you know, growing up watching at first. Okay, so here's something. Not talking about fighting. We can talk about my early years with sci-fi. So, my mom had me and my sister within a year of each other. My sister was really not into sci-fi. She was more of a crime, drama, suspense, horror kind of person. But she liked stuff like Saw and more gory stuff, things like that. That was never my thing. I don't really, I'm not down with that stuff. But at any rate, so, but one thing that we did watch all the time, like normally, you know, my sister would be off doing something else in the house, playing with her dolls, or maybe she'd just be in the TV room with us. My dad worked a lot of hours, so we would watch television. And if my dad was home, we would watch stuff like The Rifleman or Bonanza, How the West Was Won. My dad was huge into westerns. That's the era he grew up in, was the 50s. So he liked that stuff. There was also the option for sci-fi, but that was not my dad. Dad was like cowboys and Indians and World War II movies. That was what he knew, and he loved that stuff. And so that's a lot of what we had. Well, and then so beyond that, you know, Mom every once in a while would get a chance to like just watch what she wanted to watch, because Dad just didn't watch sci-fi. Which is amazing, because the first sci-fi movie I ever saw, my dad specifically was like, let's go see Empire Strikes Back. But Mom was really big into Star Trek. So I always used to picture, you know, someday, probably around this year, that there would be ships like the Enterprise, you know, that we would be going on these, we'd be able to fly to the moon and back in an hour or something like that. And how that wouldn't seem so exotic or anything. And my mom was definitely a child of the space race time, where there was all this stuff, you know, that was interesting back then. And she never let interest of astronauts or NASA die. Not, you know, like she really kept up with a lot of that stuff. And because I think my mom's big dream was that someday she'd be able to go up on a ship, and, you know, that casual flying, like getting on a plane, would be available by that time. And, you know, I think even at her old age now, she's still somebody who's like, that's going to happen. But at any rate, so we used to watch Star Trek all the time. And it was Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica, Buck Rogers. There was a bunch of other ones too. I don't even remember the names of them. They were kind of like one-offs or whatever. But they were still really cool. And I remember that, you know, I would just stay up and watch them. And then like late at night, and I've talked about this before in some other videos I've done, I would stay up really late to watch like the creature features and stuff like that. Very first time I ever saw Elvira. And it was like a crash course in puberty. And that's kind of super awkward, right? It's like, oh, are we sharing? We're sharing, right? Oh, we're not sharing? Had that really awkward situation one time. I have no problem. In fact, I've been known to overshare many things, which I have to be careful with. You know, when you're doing anything like recording videos or doing stuff like that for online content, you don't want to be like, you know, I'm really into blueberries. What do you mean you're really into blueberries? I'm really into blueberries. But I'm not. I like them on a muffin. It's about as far as that goes. But I am. It's just strange. Could you imagine running across somebody who's like, no, dude, you don't get it. Like, I'm really into muffins. And I want to go home. but I was really into, monster movies, kaiju movies before I knew they were kaiju, when it was just Gamera and Godzilla. And I'd stay up late at night, and that was the beginning of my late night habits, which have transpired to today, where I would stay up late and watch all these things, and I would watch old Vincent Price movies and stuff like that. And a lot of these actors I didn't know, and then later I recognized some of the English actors in the Star Wars films and stuff, like oh good lord, Peter Cushing, yeah. And those old Hammer horror films, he was in those sometimes as Sherlock Holmes or Van Helsing, something like that. Those sort of things, and then that really drove a love of those films home for me, where I really enjoyed those things. Those were just amazing to me. And I always thought to myself, like, God, like, I'd love to work in movies or draw that stuff someday. And that's actually what fired me up to do a lot of the artwork that I do now, and to think about, like, the the kind of science fiction stuff that I like, the epics and things. But the other part too was that during that time, I remember that there was a lot that Mom would get us, to watch and stuff like that. And then later, whenever Star Trek made its triumphant return, I'm on the wrong layer. That's okay. These are going to merge later. When it was Star Trek: The Next Generation, that was really cool. Kind of got into that, and that was just, it was nice. I was old enough to really understand what was going on. I became a huge fan of it. I collected the action figures. In fact, I was hanging up my my Enterprise back here, and the shuttlecraft from the second version of it, because the first one, I forgot how much that was different from the first incarnation that they used on that show. And those are up there now. My mom's got, to this day, if you go to my parents' house, in the living room, there's Enterprise models that she built, and she has from the toy line from Playmates hanging. I think it is Playmates. It was either Playmates or, there was two of them at that time that was making the toys, but she has those, and she has like cups with Captain Kirk and stuff like that on there. And yeah, she made my very first cosplay, which I don't cosplay, but it was really well made. I was a little Vulcan. That was my very first costume. I was Spock, or I tried to be Spock. I begged to get that haircut, and they were like, "No, you're already weird enough." This was during a time, I'm not joking. I remember telling my therapist this. He was like, "We should talk about that." I used to wear a cape all the time. Like, it was second, third, and then when we moved back to America, fourth grade for a little while. But I think coming back here in the 80s, at that time, was just too much for the average kid to go, "What is wrong with him?" Like, it was just like, we can't play with Mario. He's wearing a cape. And I used to hate that, man. That was like such a trip to go through them. Like, terrible, terrible, terrible. You know what's not been terrible has been being on TikTok. I know that a lot of people sometimes are like, "Why are you on TikTok?" I'm like, "Because it's fun." I've actually seen some really cool, artistic stuff coming through, and it's been really interesting to see all of the. There's, and here's the thing. There's always a lower denominator with any social media site, right? Any Twitter especially. But there's a lot of good in them too. And I ended up finding out that there was some really skilled and very cool people out there doing some amazing things. I don't want that line. That were just amazing. Like, they'd be like doing, God, I don't know, like everything from painting to drawing to resin casting to miniature sculpting to woodwork, cooking, tips for working with animals if you find them in the wild. I mean, just you name it, man. There was just like a smattering of all this extremely cool stuff. And I know there's a lot of people out there that just like, "Oh, I got no time for that." And, okay, that's fine. No one's forcing you to do this. But there's like a weird sort of like, I have always been raised with the idea that there is nothing wrong with trying something, giving it an honest go, and then seeing how it works out for you. I actually had 2 or 3 videos that had to do with that whole NFT thing. So let me tell you about that. So NFT is like a non-fungible token. It is a digital concept that exists utilizing something called a blockchain. Now, if you're confused, I apologize. Let me break it down even more. So basically, it has to do with cryptocurrency. And I believe you're supposed to use the cryptocurrency, things like Bitcoin and Ethereum, stuff that sounds like it comes out of the Masters of the Universe canon, right? You're supposed to use that to purchase a blockchain. A blockchain is essentially like, when you get a receipt, except this blockchain never leaves. It has to do with the metadata in the JPEG or whatever the image is, an animated GIF, whatever. It's a digital asset is what I'm understanding. And it's usually the only one of its existence or a small series of them that have these NFTs attributed and assigned to them. Now, yes, it's true. It's basically a digital file. You could make a copy of it and you could give it away, sell it, do whatever, print. But the idea is that you have the original one. And as an owner, you're supposed to adhere to it. Now, I've had some people say, oh, well, it's based on an honor system and that's easy to break. Yes, I can understand where people are coming from on that and why they're saying that. But at the exact same time, that is the same thing that happens to any and all other art out there as well, too. You end up with those circumstances where you're not really sure what is happening with that other artwork. And this is not meant to prevent it. It's meant to be able to enhance the ownership factor of it. There's a lot of times when I wonder that, too. Like, one of the reasons I hesitated to make my my comic work, available for anyone really in a digital factor is because I don't have control over ultimately where that stuff's going to end up. I have no idea what somebody's going to do with it at some point. Now the argument could be made that, well, once you release something digitally, it's pretty much out there in the world. There isn't anything you can really do with it. You just have to kind of accept that that's what's going on. You can copyright it, you can hold on to it all you want, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get a whole bunch of protection in the long run if somebody just doesn't want to, like, if you make a book and you sell it on Etsy per se and it's a PDF of your comic book, you're hoping that they're not just making 5 copies of that and sending that to their friends, but they probably are. Because a lot of times people don't want to step up to that same respect of copyright. They'll do a lot of other stuff. But let's have that discussion really quickly about copyright. So something I did learn was this. Copyright, and I've always wondered about it. Even when I've spoken to copyright lawyers and stuff, they've been on the fence about some things as well too. But it seems that copyright is kind of a weird thing because it is meant to protect and enhance the ownership factor of it. But what doesn't happen is it doesn't always cover everything from what I understand. And there's always exceptions and loopholes in there that end up protecting larger entities and companies. And I got to thinking, because I ended up really loving things like fairy tales and folk tales and stuff like that growing up. And that was a very important facet for me. It was something that mattered because, especially the teachers I had that talked about mythology and all this other stuff. Could you imagine if Time Warner exclusively owned the tales of, let's just say the Odyssey, or any of these American folklore tales that we have, like Paul Bunyan and his Big Ox Blue, like once those were out, they became folk tales that changed and were retold and retold and retold, but they stay in the public domain because they're old. When you make new creations, there's nothing wrong with profiting off of those things and saying that you claim ownership. There are Creative Commons licenses for that factor. This is my creation, this is my thing. But I'm beginning to understand where it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world to leave it open for somebody else to be able to come along and make a version of that. And it's hard for me to explain. It's not that I'm completely sold on the concept or sold on the idea. Like, I wouldn't be exactly happy if somebody took what I just created right now, this little flotilla of floating spiky islands, which is not necessarily an original idea by any stretch of the imagination. This is heavily inspired by stuff by, like, the Sega game Panzer Dragoon. But that being the case, I wouldn't like it if somebody just decided to come along and just take that from me. No, I wouldn't really be happy with that. But the truth is like, just like Panzer Dragoon inspired me, somebody else would be inspired by this, might save it to their phone or their laptop or go, ooh, I really like what's going on here. It gives me an idea for something I want to do. And so when that sort of thing starts to happen, I wouldn't mind that somebody is inspired by what I've done and may even go so far as to, pay homage to it in a certain way. I think we've all done stuff like that. We all kind of want to relive those moments that we had reading literature or a comic or watching it in a movie, you kind of want to do that. And movies, especially the ones today, and even go back 20 years, were homages to that. Like, you look at something like Back to the Future, the whole trilogy is a series of references to westerns and the 1950s. The director and a lot of the creative team were raised in that zone. A lot of that was their childhood. And for me, it would definitely be the 80s, and probably some of the 70s. But that's a time capsule. And then I look at anyone else that was born after 2000, and 2005 to 2015 is their jam, And the reason I'm saying this is because it consistently evolves, but the current standard of copyright makes for a lot of problems where it can't evolve beyond where it is. And I think that tends to make a lot of problems here. I'm going to double check to make sure I'm on the right layer before I start doing this. And I think that what ends up happening is that people get really entrenched in what they do and don't own. And sometimes you don't end up with a lot of new stuff flowing out and being created, which is something I'm always freaked out about, because we talk about, there's no new ideas, there's nothing like that, but the truth is we like recycled stuff. If that were the case, reruns and syndication, even the whole factor of streaming wouldn't even exist that way. I believe the whole platform for the television app Pluto TV is very much based on that. It's based on this whole ideology of like, hey, here's some old Western stuff. In fact, The Rifleman is on there. I found that the other night. That was kind of nice to watch. I found a bunch of shows from the 70s and 80s. I remember Chips, I think I saw on there. Golden Girls was on there. I mean, it's just like this huge smorgasbord of things like that. Well, so anyway, the point is that even in watching that and seeing that sort of stuff, like, I wonder to myself, like, well, what is happening to folk tales and art and stories like that? I mean, it made me really start thinking about that. Like, and there's a factor of creativity I wanted to try with that, because, it does exist today. And it's probably in one place that most people wouldn't even realize unless they're fans of it in the first place. The very first time I heard modern folk tale telling that was original, that was excitingly new, was my first game of Dungeons and Dragons. It was in the Greyhawk universe, which is based on the Greyhawk universe. And but the point is, those adventures were wholly unique. And then the next one was set in the Dragonlance universe. Now, granted, those were IPs created and utilized or borrowed and used in Gary Gygax's Dungeons and Dragons game, but the adventures that came from it, especially just running it in a generic D&D motif, allowed for storytelling and adventures to happen. And I have lots of character sheets of very old characters of mine that I haven't dusted off or ever played again, but they were amazing at the time to have in my life. They were just this wonderful bit that I really enjoyed. And when I think back to that, that's exactly what that was. It was this whole factor of like, being able to tell stories. And that's a rare thing, isn't it? I mean, I'm not crazy in saying that. Like, that really does seem like such a rarefied factor today, to be able to tell a story that springs from the imagination and then it gets later told and added to and reacted to and acted out beautifully. And I've seen some people go on, like, there was one guy, you always, if you do conventions, there's always that one dude that's like, well, my 31st level paladin, and sometimes I cringe at those things because I know I can't even tell stories that good. But there'll be every once in a while there's that one gamer, that one dude who, man, that was his life's connection, was that one character. And that one character meant everything to them. And that character carried over like forever into all these other worlds and things like that. And then, when they die in game, they treated that pretty seriously. Well, that was one where just hearing the story made me want to go on with more stories. It made me want to get into doing comics and tell my own stories and stuff like that. And I have I have just files of characters and names and things I developed when I was role playing and then writing for myself and stuff, because it It seemed cool. It was fun to do. But then it led to other things. It led, in my own work, to it evolving into stories I wanted to tell later. It evolved into things like Ardor and pagan zoetrope and all this other stuff. And I can imagine too that like someday if I, whenever I get all this stuff created and put out there, that maybe somebody else will be like, hey dude, I want to think. In fact, I have actually had this happen where with the original pagan zoetrope, somebody had reached out to me and said, man, I really love that. I'm so glad you wrote that. It kind of made me want to go and do comics myself. I'm like, you freaking do that. You go do it, man. I mean, I'm glad that was some sort of help because, I mean, I think about that too. That's exactly how I got into it. Like my first comic book was either Turok, Son of Stone, which was through Whitman Gold Key Comics, one of those two, and then if it wasn't the first one was actually Uncle Scrooge, which was a Gold Key. No, it was a Whitman comic, and it was the ones drawn by Carl Barks, the good duck artist. Nothing against the other guy. And it made me fall in love with Disney, like on a whole nother level beyond the movies. I'm like, what? Uncle Scrooge is just awesome. And of course, that made me a lifelong DuckTales fan later and stuff. But I played part of the game on one of my playthroughs on my YouTube channel. It was actually really well done. It's a remake of the old NES game. It was really, really well done. But I don't think it's available anymore on Steam. At any rate, those kind of tales allow you, when you go through that stuff, you want to tell stories. You want to make these stories up and tell really cool tales about them. And I always thought about that, like what are we going to do whenever everything is completely owned and you're not allowed to make derivatives of it? It's probably one of the reasons why I don't get that upset when I see somebody, making like their version of Link from Legend of Zelda, or doing like a cosplay or fan art of things, because I know that you're going to get your purists out there that are like, I can't stand fan art and that sort of stuff. But the truth is that I think the vast majority of us all at some point in time in our lives may have done that. And I know that the big question there too is like when you're at a show, if somebody comes along and says, hey, I really want you to draw Captain America. I've actually drawn Captain America more times than I ever thought I would. I mean, just for, and I didn't mind. Captain America's a cool guy, he's a Marvel character. And but there's always these things too that happen where you're never, at least in my head, I'm like, man, what is the future of storytelling going to be like? Because at some point you've got to wonder, like, is everything going to be copywritten down? And there's nothing really wrong with it, except that I think that the copyright system is kind of broken. I don't think it engenders fair usage or reinterpretation. If you love something, you're going to want to talk about it. Is it really any different than people that will make a review about a movie or talk about it in a podcast? No, it's not really, because sometimes those podcasts get monetized just for talking about somebody else's creation. Sometimes things like the review of a Star Wars game or the creation of something from a fan standpoint makes a lot of sense. And I'm always more interested in the companies that don't necessarily want to press all these charges and go after, people that are, just trying to help out and create something, unique out of it and pay homage back to this fandom. And I think that's a big issue. It's something that needs to be talked about more, but unfortunately, as long as the House of Mouse is out there doing their thing and creating stuff like they are and holding on to it with an ever-tightening grip, it's going to get really bad for a while. One would think that sort of stuff would be all right, and I can understand where, if you're an IP, user or owner, and all of a sudden somebody's coming along and, if somebody else started drawing pagan zoetrope, yeah, I'd be upset. I mean, there's certainly that argument to be made. But I just think that the system may need to be retweaked. I think there needs to be something more done from that. Because at the exact same time, somebody came along and created something really cool from it. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. I like this. This makes sense to me. I'm going to try inking this in darker and see if I can get a better result with this. I'm not liking all the scratchy. But if they can do something that really comes together and it works, like I really buy into it, then I have no problem with that. And because I remember, like, here's a good example. This is probably going out on a limb a little bit, but maybe somebody will understand where I'm coming from on this. When I used to do improv and, you tell jokes or whatever, and you're performing in theater, you're you're making movements based on what other people are doing. You know, like your jokes are coming from there. They flow from interactions with other actors and stuff. And you try your best to, you know, just kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? You're trying your best to just, you know, experience it and have fun with it and do that sort of stuff. But you need that other person's interaction there to create, to do these things and be in that world with them, right? Whether it's improv or a play or just, you know, whatever. And imagine if you didn't have that to play off of. I mean, that's a serious thing that I even deal with, like, in creating any videos that I do, because so much of what I do, from my podcast to stuff like this, is very much based on concepts of, I'm doing this by myself. Like, you know, I don't always have accompaniment. In fact, I rarely do, because I'm kind of a control freak when it comes to the content that I put out there. And boring though some of it may be, or off kilter, or just maybe not the most exciting thing, it still feels like, well, this is mine. You know, I'm responsible for this. I really like what I'm doing with this, that sort of a thing. And that's really important to me. So that's why I'm the way I am with that. You know, the bad part about digital drawing is that you can't flip the paper. That's just something I want to do all the time. All right, so I'm not going to go too far, because this was really meant to be just a little bit of a concept to ink through. But I might turn this into a small video, a 60-second, I need to work on my diction, clip for TikTok. Those seem to be doing pretty good. In fact, on TikTok, if you follow me, I'm the Artisan Rogue on there. Of course, what else would I be? But if you do, you'll go on there and you'll see that I did a bunch of time lapses, and I've also been showing off and talking about older artwork of mine. The next video I have going up is going to be covering Ardor, in fact. And so that's, well, it's already 1 o'clock in the morning now. So about 8 or 9 in the morning today, right around the same time this video will be coming out on YouTube, is when I'll be showing that stuff. But it's been a lot of fun. It seems like people have been receptive to it. I'm really hoping they have been, that, you know, that's been something cool that they've enjoyed watching and that sort of thing. I've gotten a few questions and stuff, but, you know, not as much interaction. TikTok is such a strange environment to be a part of. It really is. There's times when I'm like, man, I didn't expect it to be like how I don't know what I was. I'm going to preface that by saying I had no idea what in the world that was going to be like. I really didn't know. I guess in my head I thought, oh, well, it's going to be more like Vine was or something. And there are echoes of it. I was not on Vine. Well, no, I was. I did one video on Vine, and then I got scared and I got off that platform really quick. Not because anything bad happened to me. It didn't. But more because I was like, I don't know what to do on here. I can't be as funny as these people. These people are funny on here. And not everyone was funny. But the vast majority of the ones that I followed were very funny and very creative and very good. And I didn't understand a lot of what was going on TikTok, because I thought it was like, oh, it's a young man's game. I don't belong on there. And then I started getting on here on TikTok, and I was like, oh, look at that. There's all these older people. They're getting on here. Soon it won't be cool anymore, and I'll feel good. I'll feel good about this. But a lot of my former students were huge fans of Vine, and I imagine that if I looked hard enough, they might end up finding their accounts on TikTok. I don't want to look for them. I had a lot of students that I don't remember, and they may not be too pleased, like, oh, God, why did he add me as a friend? So, oh, man. Well, this came out to be a nice little study. This is okay. I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I might, you know what? I might end up trying to use this as a background of some kind and put this into one of my works, but I'm not sure what. I've been messing with the idea of just doing environmental shots and not having be so character-based, because I have spent a long time just creating some of the characters. I'm not saying if they're villains or not. That's all in the storyline. Characters for Ardor. And you'll see more of that if you follow me on TikTok. It's kind of a shameless plug there. You'll see more of that on there about what I'm talking about and what those characters are like and that sort of thing. I start going through the book a little bit. That is also still available on my Etsy store. And man, you know what? It's so totally weird. I have never really been a big fan of like trying to push a sale. I would much rather be able to sit here and talk and hear back stories and just get to know people. I had somebody one time when I still did sales for a little tiny bit of time tell me that I have kind of that old-fashioned car salesman appeal. And I was like, I don't know if that's a good thing or not, man. I was like, what? What do you mean? Should I be offended? That doesn't sound great. But they just meant that it was like a real kind of down home sort of feeling to things. And it always made me think of the dude off the true crime thing. I can't remember now, but they just a real old fashioned sort of way about him. And I thought, oh, maybe that's what they mean about me. I don't know. That's just kind of weird to hear that, you know, like, ooh, okay, I guess so. I guess that's cool. But I hate like trying to press what I like onto other people, because I made the stuff and it's ridiculous because I'm trying to sell my artwork and I'm trying to get people interested in what I'm making, and Ardor is very important to me, just like Pagan Zoetrope was. But I've talked about this in other videos, the disconnect I have of trying to sell online or through anything like this without having somebody just always there that I can just kind of showcase and go, this is what do you like this, you know, or something like that. There's also something to be said too whenever, you know, you're looking at artwork and you're holding it up and it's just different, like in person. And it was, which one was it I picked up? Oh, my werewolf one. So this was one that was part of my series that never got released, and it's a complete block all the way around, and it's super shiny because it's been not epoxied, but it's been sealed. And when I have a whole bunch of them here in this that never got a chance to make it out to shows. I just didn't, and I was sad about. You know, I was like, oh God, kind of wish that had been something I could have, you know, done more with. But the chance will come again. It'll happen again. At any rate, so when that happens, I just don't know how to go about that. Like, I know they're going to get listed on Etsy, and I'm going to try and make some little video clips since Etsy supports that now. But I know that I'm also going to have to start using TikTok more for that. In fact, one of my most highly engaged videos on there was one where I was actually sitting right over here on this part of the desk and talking about it. I set up my camera phone and I was like, art. And or more than that, I actually said words. But when I did that, people seemed to be like, cool. And so that was great. And the traffic to my Etsy store did start to go up. Now I switched to a business account, and that business account has allowed me to put a live link on there that does go to my Etsy store. So anyway, so thanks for hanging out. Thanks for, you know, keeping me company while I did this little drawing. I'm going to go ahead and now save this. And 52 minutes. I kept it under an hour. That's no small miracle, right? I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then maybe I'll end up carrying this through and making something more with it. I might actually try and turn this into another finished piece that will be like an environmental piece, and so there'd be another part. It's not going to be connected to this video. I'm not going to pull another super long one that's 2.5 hours. But I'm really liking how this is looking, and I want to do something with these things and see what that looks like. I think that'll be a lot of fun to create something like that. And then maybe that'll have something characteristic in it, some character, but not real big. I won't do that. Well, I don't know. Maybe I will. It's my artwork. I can do what I want. So, all right. Well, thanks for hanging out and watching, and I will see you in the next video, which I'll probably end up making more videos tomorrow night. So then I guess you'll see more videos soon. Until then, take care.